He never saw it coming. One moment, Airbnb was on top of the world, a thriving 30 billion empire connecting millions of travelers to homes around the globe, and the next moment, everything was collapsing. It's early 2020, and Brian Chesky stands in disbelief as his life's work teeters on the edge of ruin. In just 8 weeks, Airbnb loses 80% of its business, 80%, as if a speeding car slammed into a brick wall without warning. Bookings vanish overnight, phones that rang incessantly with eager customers now sit silent. Cancellation after cancellation floods in as a deadly new virus sweeps the world and global travel comes to a standstill. Borders close, airports empty out, cities fall quiet. The dream he spent over a decade building is crumbling in real time, and there's absolutely nothing he can do to stop the bleeding. He feels utterly helpless, asking himself, what do you do when the whole world pulls the rug out from under you? Headlines scream doom. Will Airbnb survive? Is this the end of Airbnb? Words that hit Brian like punches to the gut. Just months ago, he was preparing to take his company public, to celebrate an incredible journey. Now he's staring at the possibility that Airbnb might not survive the year. The walls feel like they're closing in, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. His heart pounds in his chest as he opens his laptop to see the latest numbers: revenue plummeting, reservations gutted, the company's once bright future now shrouded in uncertainty and fear. This is the moment that will make or break him. This is the story of how Airbnb nearly died and was reborn from its ashes, stronger than ever. But to truly understand this near-fatal crisis, we have to go back to the beginning, back to when Airbnb was just a crazy idea, a long shot born out of desperation. The year is 2007, and Brian is a young, aspiring entrepreneur who has just moved to San Francisco with his friend Joe Gebbia. They have no stable jobs, no investors, not even enough money to pay next month's rent on their tiny apartment. Bills are piling up, and anxiety hangs in the air. One day, broken restless, they notice that a big design conference is coming to town and every hotel is fully booked. In a flash of inspiration, Brian and Joe decide to rent out air mattresses on their apartment floor to conference goers and cook them breakfast in the morning, an air bed and breakfast, they jokingly call it. It sounds absurd, but they are out of options. They spruce up their living room, put up a simple website, and wait, hearts pounding, hoping someone, anyone, will be crazy enough to pay to sleep on their floor. The first booking comes through, and suddenly their idea isn't so crazy after all. On the night their guests arrive, Brian and Joe scramble to make everything perfect. They lay out clean sheets on the air mattresses, buy fresh bagels for breakfast, and then, with hearts in their throats, open the door to welcome their first customers. And incredibly, it works. 3 guests, complete strangers, take a chance on this odd offer. Brian and Joe welcome them in, give them a place to sleep, share breakfast and local tips, and in the process discover something magical. Strangers aren't just customers, they are people full of stories and curiosity. That weekend, cramped in a small apartment with people they'd never met before, Brian glimpses the spark of an idea that could change travel forever. He and Joe realize they might be onto something much bigger than just rent money, a whole new way for people to experience the world by living with locals and forming real connections. Humbled and excited by this proof of concept, they officially found a company called Airbed Breakfast, soon to be known as Airbnb. They bring in their old roommate, Nathan Blekeksik, as a third co-founder and tech whiz. The trio is brimming with optimism, convinced they have discovered something revolutionary. But the road ahead is anything but easy. In those early days, their excitement often meets cold reality. Investors shake their heads at the idea, strangers sleeping in strangers' homes. That'll never work, they are told over and over. Brian and his co-founders pitch their idea to anyone who will listen, and nobody believes in them. Rejection emails pile up, one investor after another passes on Airbnb. Desperate for cash to stay afloat, they max out credit cards to keep the lights on and the website running. Every morning, Brian wakes up with a knot in his stomach, wondering how they'll survive another month. Doubt creeps in like a shadow, maybe this idea really is crazy. In a last-ditch move, The founders get scrappy and decide to sell breakfast cereal as a political parody during the 2008 US election, Obama O's, and Cap'n McCain's, 40 a box as a collector's item. Late at night in their cramped kitchen, Brian and Joe hand-fold hundreds of cereal boxes, their fingers blistered from the scissors and glue. It's a ridiculous plan, selling cereal to save a housing startup, but incredibly, it works. They end up selling $30,000 worth of cereal, enough to keep Airbnb alive a little longer. This bizarre little victory, won by pure grit and creativity, teaches Brian a powerful lesson: when your back is against the wall, you fight with everything you have. That fighting spirit carries them through dark nights of doubt. And indeed, their persistence finally pays off. After dozens of rejections, they get a meeting at Y Combinator, a prestigious startup accelerator. The interview initially goes poorly. The investors don't get the concept until, in a moment of inspiration, Brian pulls out one of those Obama O's cereal boxes to show just how far they'd go to support their idea. The interviewers are stunned and amused. If these founders can convince people to pay $40 for a 4-box of cereal, maybe, just maybe, they can convince strangers to stay in each other's homes. Impressed by their hustle, Y Combinator accepts Airbnb. They receive a modest seed investment, only about $20,000, but to Brian and his team it feels like $1 million, a lifeline to turn their scrappy idea into a real business. They seize the chance with everything they've got, refining their website, learning from mentors, and slowly winning over users. Their foot is finally in the door. Slowly but surely, Airbnb begins to catch on. One booking turns into 10, 10 into 100. Travelers love the personal touch, the feeling of belonging anywhere. Hosts, ordinary people with spare rooms or empty homes, start making real money by welcoming guests. The idea that everyone laughed at is now spreading like wildfire. Before they know it, thousands of hosts sign up, eager to share their homes. The growth is astonishing. Airbnb spreads to hundreds of thousands of cities across the globe, every continent except Antarctica. By 2015, Airbnb has expanded worldwide, from Paris to Tokyo to Cape Town, and millions of people are using it to find a place to stay that feels like home. Brian, Joe, and Nate grow their tiny startup into a hospitality revolution that's shaking up the state hotel industry. Investors who once snubbed them now fight to invest. The company's growth is explosive. Airbnb becomes one of Silicon Valley's brightest success stories, valued in the tens of billions of dollars. From having to sell cereal to survive, they now have 7 million listings in over 100,000 cities, hosting more than 2 million guests every night. Airbnb isn't just a scrappy startup anymore, it's a global phenomenon redefining how people travel, and Brian is its young CEO at the helm. Along the way there are challenges, battles with city regulators, concerns about trust and safety, the need to maintain quality as they scale. Airbnb even branches out beyond home rentals, launching Airbnb experiences, guided tours and activities with locals, and exploring ambitious new services like high-end vacation homes and even transportation. By late 2019, Airbnb stands proud, with a workforce of around 7,500 and plans for a much-anticipated initial public offering. For Brian and his team, it feels like reaching the mountaintop after a long climb. They are on the verge of turning that crazy apartment floor idea into a publicly traded company. Nothing could have prepared them for what would happen next. Then, in early 2020, the unthinkable happens. A new virus emerges on the other side of the world. At first, it barely registers amid Airbnb's IPO preparations, just a few unsettling news reports. But within weeks, that distant worry erupts into a full-blown global pandemic. Country after country imposes lockdowns. International travel grinds to a halt. Fear spreads even faster than the virus. People cancel trips en masse as the world hunkers down at home. And Airbnb, a company built on bringing people together, is suddenly in free fall. Brian watches with alarm as bookings plummet day after day. March 2020 becomes a nightmare. Governments close borders, airlines ground flights, major events are cancelled. The very foundation of Airbnb's business is shaking. Brian wakes up each morning to a new cascade of cancellations on the platform. Vacation plans made months ago evaporate in an instant. The revenue they forecasted for 2020 vanishes virtually overnight. On video calls from his home, Brian stares into his laptop camera, trying to steady his voice as he updates his team on the cascading losses. His face is drawn, his eyes reflecting the weight of each dreadful statistic. In one brutal week, Airbnb's bookings around the world dropped to near zero. 8 weeks into the crisis, almost 80% of the company's revenue is gone, wiped out as if by a tsunami. It's a gut punch unlike anything they've ever experienced. Airbnb isn't just having a bad quarter, the business is imploding. Brian feels like he's the captain of a ship caught in a once-in-a-century storm, watching wave after wave slam into the hull, unsure if they can stay afloat. One Sunday in mid-March, he convenes an emergency board meeting via video. For the first time ever, Brian reports that Airbnb's revenue is shrinking instead of growing. The faces on the call are grave. Some board members quietly wonder if this young company can survive such a blow. Brian promises them he will do everything in his power to save Airbnb, but deep down, he feels the same fear they do. Behind closed doors, he fights rising panic. Every plan they had for the year has been obliterated. The IPO is shelved indefinitely, survival comes first now. Brian knows that without drastic action, Airbnb could run out of cash within months. In a desperate bid to keep the company alive, he scrambles for financial lifelines. In April, he manages to secure over $1 billion in emergency investment from private investors, accepting terms far less favorable than he'd ever imagined only months prior. It's humbling, taking a high-interest loan and giving up equity at a slashed valuation, but it buys Airbnb something priceless: time. He'll need every second of it. The stress is unlike anything he's known. Brian feels as if he's aged 10 years in 10 weeks. Yet every day he forces himself to get back up and fight for Airbnb's survival. Brian is now making decisions at a breakneck pace, choices he never dreamed he'd face. As travel bans expand and the situation grows bleaker, one question haunts him: how will we get through this? He knows layoffs may be inevitable, but he delays that as long as he can, cutting other costs first. Marketing is frozen, executives take pay cuts, every non-essential project is slashed. He also faces an agonizing dilemma with their community. Millions of guests have bookings for upcoming trips that they now can't take. According to standard policy, many of those bookings are technically non-refundable, meaning the hosts would keep the money and guests would lose out. Sticking to that policy could preserve short-term revenue, much-needed cash, but it would betray the trust of guests who desperately need their money back. On the other hand, refunding those trips will infuriate hosts counting on that income, and cost Airbnb a fortune in payouts. Brian spends sleepless nights agonizing over this no-win decision. Ultimately, he makes the call from his gut: Airbnb will grant full refunds to guests who have to cancel due to COVID-19. It's the right thing to do. He believes people are suffering and need their money, even though the financial hit is enormous and many hosts will be upset. When Brian announces this policy, thousands of hosts cry out in frustration. They had counted on that money to pay their own bills. Brian hears their anger and pain. To help mend the rift, Airbnb sets up a $250 million fund to reimburse hosts a portion of what they lost from those cancellations, and Brian and the founders personally contribute and raise an additional $17 million to assist the most struggling hosts. It's not enough to make everyone whole, but it's a gesture of goodwill in a time of heartbreak. These moves come straight from Airbnb's values, caring for the community and doing more than what's expected, but they also accelerate the company's cash drain. Airbnb is bleeding money faster than ever. And still, it's not enough. With revenue in free fall, Brian is forced into the hardest decision of his life. Airbnb has to shrink dramatically to survive. This means layoffs, thousands of them. The very thought makes him feel sick. The employees of Airbnb aren't just workers, they are teammates, friends, people who poured their hearts into building this dream with him. Cutting jobs is the last thing he ever wanted to do. But by late April 2020, as the scale of the downturn becomes undeniable, there's no other choice. Brian prepares to lay off roughly 25 of the company, about 1,900 of his 7,500 employees. He writes a letter to his staff, a letter he never imagined he'd have to write, and tears well up as he tells them this devastating news, stressing that none of it is their fault and expressing his heartfelt regret. In that letter, he also promises to help those leaving in every way he can, offering generous severance packages, extended healthcare coverage for a year, and even personal support to help them find new jobs. He makes sure they know this decision reflects a global crisis, not their individual worth. On the day of the layoffs, Brian speaks to the company via a video town hall. His voice cracks as he explains the painful steps they must take. Hundreds of faces fill his screen, faces of talented people who helped Airbnb rise to greatness, now hearing that they will no longer be a part of it. It's heartbreaking. Brian chokes up seeing colleagues break down in tears, hearing their voices tremble as they say goodbye. Many of them still manage to express love for the company as they depart, which makes it even more poignant. It feels like a family being torn apart. After delivering the news, Brian mutes his microphone and lets the tears fall, bowing his head as waves of emotion crash over him. For a long moment, he just sits there, alone at his kitchen table, shaking with sobs. Once the calls finally end and the goodbyes are over, Brian closes his laptop in silence. The office, which once buzzed with energy and laughter, is now virtual and eerily quiet. A quarter of his team is gone in an instant. Brian feels like he's failed them. That night, he can't sleep at all. He paces his living room with the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. In the span of mere weeks, he's had to break so many promises, to travelers, to hosts, to employees, and it's almost more than he can bear. He wonders if those dire headlines might end up being right after all, if maybe Airbnb's story will truly end here, a casualty of this unprecedented collapse. The thought gnaws at him, did I fail? In the silent hours before dawn, Brian can't escape the doubts flooding his mind. Perhaps he expanded too fast. Perhaps he wasn't prepared for a crisis of this magnitude. For a brief moment, he even wonders if someone else might have led the company through this better than he did. Guilt and fear weigh on him like 1,000 pounds. But amid the haze of despair, a small voice inside reminds him of everything he and his team have overcome to get here. This cannot be how it ends, he tells himself. It will not be. Yet, in that darkness, something begins to stir inside him, a flicker of fight that refuses to die. Brian thinks back to the early days, when everyone said Airbnb was impossible and how they refused to give up then. He notices a box on a shelf in his home office, one of the original Obama O cereal boxes they created in 2008. He picks it up, runs his fingers over the cardboard. It's a tangible reminder of who they were, scrappy, relentless entrepreneurs who didn't quit when the odds were against them. Back then, when everything was stacked against them, they found a way. Now, facing an even bigger crisis, that same spirit is their only way out. As he holds that cereal box, Brian makes a quiet vow to himself, this will not be the end of Airbnb. Around that time, a mentor and board member, Ken Chenault, the former CEO of American Express who had steered his company through 9/11 and the 2008 recession, calls Brian. Ken's voice is calm but urgent, forged by his own experiences in crises. Over a tense phone call on a Sunday, Ken tells him something that sticks in Brian's mind, this is your defining moment. You will be remembered for how you handled this, he says, and if you rise to the occasion, this will be your finest hour. Those words light a spark in Brian. He realizes that if this is going to be Airbnb's darkest hour, it also can be their finest hour if they choose to make it so. He wipes his tears, straightens his back, and decides then and there to lead as boldly as he can. There's no option to freeze or to surrender. This is a crisis, yes, he thinks, but it's also our chance to show who we really are. Brian gathers his diminished executive team on a video call. It's time to reset. He speaks to them from the heart, we're going to get through this, Brian says firmly, his voice steadier now. But to do that, we have to simplify and focus. We have to strip back to what really matters. He looks at each team member's face in the grid of the screen, eyes full of resolve. We built this company from nothing once. We can build it again. If we have to rebuild Airbnb from the ground up, we will, together. The team, inspired by Brian's determination, nods along. They all feel it. This is a fight for Airbnb's life, and they are in it together. It's time to get back to basics, to rediscover the essence of their business. Brian and his leaders lay out a straightforward plan: focus on our core. All the experimental projects and nice-to-haves they had been working on, Airbnb studios, luxury retreats, transportation ideas, are put on hold or cut entirely. They can't afford distractions. Every ounce of energy must go into the original home-sharing platform, into supporting hosts and guests through this storm. He reflects on Airbnb's core mission, to help anyone belong anywhere, and realizes that mission matters now more than ever in a world suddenly distanced and isolated. If they can align every decision to that purpose, they'll not only survive, they'll make a difference when people desperately need it. Keep it simple, take care of people, and find where the need is greatest. That becomes their mantra. They soon notice something hopeful amid the chaos. Even though global tourism is frozen, people still need somewhere to go. Families are seeking safe getaways within driving distance. Remote workers, untethered from offices, are looking for long-term stays away from crowded cities. Some people need temporary housing to isolate safely or to be near loved ones in need. Travel as we know it is on hold, but not all travel. The team realizes Airbnb can still serve these new needs. If people can't travel far, they'll travel close. If they don't feel safe in hotels, they'll seek private homes where they feel in control. Home, that's what Airbnb can offer, even in a pandemic. So Brian and his team pivot the company's focus. They retool the platform almost overnight to emphasize local and longer-term stays. They highlight listings in quiet rural areas, cozy cabins in the woods, beach houses by the sea, country cottages, places within a short drive for millions of city dwellers craving a safe change of scenery. They roll out enhanced cleaning standards and safety protocols, giving hosts detailed guidelines and a certification if they commit to rigorous cleaning. They introduce flexible booking policies and longer stay discounts, encouraging month-long stays for those who want a temporary new home to quarantine in or work remotely from. The message is clear: Airbnb is open for those who need it, not for traditional vacations to far-flung destinations, but for nearby retreats, work-from-anywhere escapes, and finding a personal sanctuary in uncertain times. This renewed focus ignites the employees as well. Though the team is smaller now, everyone left is driven by a singular purpose: to save Airbnb. They pour themselves into the work, coding late into the night, rapidly launching new features for a changed world, personally calling hosts and guests to offer support and reassurance. Even from their separate homes, the team stands united and energized. They refuse to let the company's spirit die on their watch. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide begins to turn. By mid-2020, something remarkable is happening. People are using Airbnb again, just differently. A young couple in New York City, tired of being trapped in their tiny apartment, books a cabin in the Catskill Mountains for a month to get some fresh air. A nurse in Los Angeles, drained from months on the COVID-19 front lines, finds solace in a quiet beach house she rents through Airbnb for a much-needed respite. All over the world, thousands of guests cautiously start booking stays, not to sightsee or attend events, but to find a safe haven or a temporary home during the pandemic. And hosts, many of whom saw their calendars wiped clean in March, begin receiving bookings again. One host in a small mountain town who had been on the brink of bankruptcy suddenly sees a flood of requests from city families looking for refuge in nature. The income from those bookings means she can pay her mortgage and keep her beloved property, a lifeline she never expected. Each new reservation is like a tiny spark of light in the darkness. It's not a full rebound by any stretch, but it's no longer free fall. Within the company, hope creeps back in. The remaining employees share each small victory with one another: a big booking here, a grateful message from a host there. Morale, which was at rock bottom, starts to lift. They've stopped the bleeding. Airbnb's drastic measures and sharp pivot are paying off, at least enough to stabilize the patient. By late summer 2020, the worst seems to be over. The company has bottomed out and is slowly regaining its footing. It's still far from the booming business it was a year prior, but the ship has weathered the storm's fiercest onslaught and is still afloat. In fact, by the third quarter of 2020, Airbnb even manages to stop the bleeding and post a small positive cash flow, an almost unthinkable turnaround from the free fall of the spring. Brian and his team did what they promised: they saved Airbnb from drowning. And Brian changes too. Gone is the wide-eyed assumption that growth comes easily. In its place is a steely determination tempered by humility. Throughout the summer and fall, he communicates constantly, not just with the board and investors, but with all his employees, with hosts, with guests, being as transparent as possible. He holds weekly all-hands video meetings with the team, answering every question honestly, even when the answers are painful. This vulnerability and openness start to rebuild the trust and confidence of those around him. People see that Airbnb isn't giving up. In fact, it's fighting harder than ever to live up to its mission of belonging and community, even when connecting people is harder than ever. By the fall of 2020, investors who had written Airbnb off in the spring are watching the company's resilience with admiration. Against all odds, the idea of reviving the IPO enters the conversation once more. It seems almost unbelievable. 6 months ago, Brian had figuratively torn the IPO paperwork in half and braced for bankruptcy, and now, because they adapted and survived, Wall Street is interested again. With cautious optimism, Airbnb dusts off its IPO plans. Brian is stunned to realize that this outcome, which in April felt impossible, is now within reach. They've endured the nightmare and made it through to the other side. December 2020, San Francisco. It's a chilly morning, and Brian sits in front of his computer, not on a bustling stock exchange floor as he once imagined, but in his home office on Zoom, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans instead of a suit, to watch Airbnb's stock begin trading for the first time. He takes a deep breath as the clock ticks down. The screen comes alive with numbers, and bang, Airbnb's shares open at far above the IPO price. In fact, the stock more than doubles in value within minutes, giving Airbnb a valuation of nearly $100 billion. Brian's jaw drops as he sees the market capitalization soar past any figure he ever dared imagine. His phone buzzes with texts. His co-founders Joe and Nate are on the other end, virtually cheering and exchanging disbelief. "Can you believe this?" they message, peppering the chat with celebratory emojis. None of them ever imagined this moment would feel so surreal. Instead of standing together on a ringing NASDAQ floor, they are each at home watching the numbers on a screen, yet they share an overwhelming sense of triumph and vindication. Brian laughs aloud, a release of months of tension, and finds that he's crying, too, tears of joy this time. He thinks of everything it took to get here: the air mattresses on the floor back in 2007, the investors who slammed doors in their face, the cereal boxes they glued together to stay afloat, the millions of nights hosting strangers, the painful goodbyes in 2020 when the world stopped, the nights he lay awake terrified it was over, the days of grit and hope that followed. All of it has led to this unbelievable comeback. Airbnb is not only alive, it's thriving, hailed as one of the great turnaround stories of the pandemic era. By the end of its first trading day, Airbnb is worth more than the top hotel chains in the world combined. The headlines now tell a very different story than those in April. Airbnb soars in stunning rebound. Brian is almost speechless during interviews, expressing humility and astonishment at the outcome. For him, the stock price is more than just a number, it's a symbol of validation, of resilience. It proves that the company everyone thought would die has not only survived but come back stronger than ever. In the aftermath, as vaccines start to promise an end to the pandemic, the world slowly opens up again. Airbnb, battle-hardened and renewed, continues to adapt and lead in a changed travel landscape. The transformation that occurred during that crucible year of 2020 leaves an indelible mark on Brian and his company. Airbnb emerged not as the same company it was before, but as something leaner, wiser, more intimately connected to its mission than ever. And Brian emerged a different kind of leader, one who learned through pain and trial what true leadership really means. He discovered that when nothing is certain, you must double down on your principles, on doing what's right, even if it's costly. He finds that a crisis is a spotlight, revealing the core of a company's culture. It's easy to have values in good times, true character shows when everything is falling apart. He learned that culture isn't your ping-pong tables or fancy offices, culture is what you do in the darkest of days. Most of all, he learned about himself, about resilience, about courage, about the power of staying true to one's vision. Standing at the end of this harrowing journey, Brian often shares the biggest lesson of all. The thing you learn most in a crisis is who you really are, he says. When everything falls apart, you're left with your values and your character, and that's all you have to guide you. Airbnb's story is now etched in history as a testament to the human spirit, a testament to never losing faith, even when the world stops, to seeing opportunity in disaster, and to rebuilding, brick by brick, when everything seems broken. Airbnb went through a near-death experience and emerged like a phoenix, its defining legend of rebirth. Their journey shows that sometimes, at the very moment you think you've lost everything, you might be on the verge of building something even greater. The collapse of 2020 became the launchpad for a new era of strength and innovation for Airbnb. So when life knocks you to your knees and everything seems lost, remember Airbnb's story. Remember that within your darkest setbacks lie the seeds of your most extraordinary comeback. Never give up, because the hardest trials can birth the most extraordinary resurrections.